Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of GeoPod. I'm your host, Dylan Woods. Once again, we're in a little bit of a different setting. As I've said on my previous video, my previous upload, I'm currently in between places. So you're all going to see a lot of different settings. As of right now, where I was, there was a huge power outage as a result of a storm, which disrupted my schedule to a certain extent. However, I still try to get an upload out there for you guys this week and just discuss some of the things that have occurred this week and some of the things that I want to give you my take on, my 2 cents on, if you will. So let's start off with the ongoing negotiations pertaining to both Russia as well as Iran, right? So currently trilateral meetings are being held between Russian, American and Ukrainian delegations pertaining to any potential ceasefire to the end of the Ukrainian war. Now obviously Russia has made it quite clear, not merely recently but over the course of the past few years, that there's no intention whatsoever of ending its war prematurely, at the very least not until its strategic objectives are met. Now let's make one thing clear: its strategic objectives remain the same: the full capitulation of Ukraine as a stepping stone for future campaigns against Eastern Europe. That's the end goal of the Kremlin as of this particular moment in time. And no developments in the short to mid-term are probably going to change that. There's a very simple way to dissuade Vladimir Putin. There's a very simple way to deter the Russian war effort, and that's by keep sponsoring Ukraine, making Ukraine as resilient as possible, and making sure that they can, and they have the ability, the equipment, the resources to damage Russia, both within the Ukrainian theater as well as on its own soil, increasing its deterrence, damaging their morale, their resilience, their economy in the process. So that's pretty much all I want to say about that. And the same goes for Iran. Bilateral talks between American and Iranian delegations have been held in Oman for multiple days now. The status quo remains unbreached, unbroken, untied, and nothing hints that any real developments will be made in the near future. Iran has made it quite clear that it is not willing to compromise on its enrichment policies. It is not willing to compromise on the rebuilding of its ballistic missiles, its stockpiles, and its ballistic missile program in general. And it has no interest in stopping its support, financing, and training, sponsoring of its proxy network throughout the region. So obviously that at a very near moment in time will probably mean the end of any diplomatic endeavors between American and Iranian delegations. But till that point, the Americans and the Israelis would have to rely on more forceful methods to neutralize, or at the very least to efficiently contain or deter the threat that is the Ayatollah regime. So again, that's pretty much all I want to say regarding these ongoing talks, because really nothing new is occurring and nothing new is going to occur. Iran and Russia have had very clear policies regarding the Western world from the onset of their campaign, whether military, terrorist, political, or economical. The two of them are part of the four horsemen, as I often refer to them, the adversary entente, which currently forms the anti-Western bloc that is ever expanding, and that forms the greatest threat towards the Western Hemisphere as of this particular moment in time. Now, what I do want to discuss a little bit more in detail are the recent developments pertaining to the Epstein case. And the reason why I want to delve a little bit more into that is because recently the DOJ has released millions of documents pertaining to the Epstein files that have compromised and besmirched and discredited a significant amount of individuals and put them in a very bad daylight, so to speak. Now, usually I wouldn't really discuss these matters because, right, they're legal matters pertaining to the United States of America. They aren't necessarily geopolitical matters. However, some of the documents that have been disseminated by the DOJ do have a very geopolitical hint to it. And one of those, or rather one set of data, is what's very interesting to me is, I believe it's about 1068 documents that persistently name Vladimir Putin in one way, shape or form. Now, obviously I've been scrolling through social media, through Instagram, through TikTok, through LinkedIn, and I've seen and read a lot about conspiracy theories that the whole Epstein scheme is a Russian setup. Vladimir Putin is the mastermind. Jeffrey Epstein was Vladimir Putin's banker, and many, many, many more. And I'm just here to shed some light on those theories and conspiracies, and kind of review whether or not they have any truth to them, or whether or not they can have any truth to them. Now, when oftentimes people like to paint the whole, rich capital elite scheme as one big conspiracy theory, right? They're all out to get us, they're all out to mitigate us, they're all out to control us. And to a certain extent, that's true, right? If you want to monopolize your industry, if you want to be the top dog in your industry, if you want to expand to other industries, you have to exert a certain amount of control. You have to exert a certain amount of control over your competitors. You have to exert a certain amount of control over your customers, your clients, your buyers, etc., etc. You have to be able to influence public perception, and to a lesser extent, culture in general, in order to make your businesses more fruitful. Especially the top tier economic moguls of this time will certainly have those interests in mind. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are at the helm of every decision that's being made. Influence is not omnipotence, and that's something that most laymen often mix where it shouldn't be mixed. Now, pertaining to Vladimir Putin and his mentioning in the Epstein files, some people have asked me, is it true? Could Vladimir Putin possibly have orchestrated this? And my answer to that question is yes and no. Let's start with no. What we have to understand is that Soviet operations pertaining to the analysis, the assessment, the manipulation, the sabotage, the diversion of Western culture goes all the way back, long before Vladimir Putin became a relevant figure within geopolitics. Okay, so no, Vladimir Putin on his own did not orchestrate this. However, what Vladimir Putin could have done is make use of data, knowledge and experience that was developed and gathered for decades on end by Russian Soviet agents within Western culture, within American culture, who had the sole aim of gathering as much intelligence on Western societies, in particular how they function, what their vulnerabilities are, how they are most likely to develop, what are their pros and cons, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and how can we use those attributes against them, or rather in favor of ours. Now, here's what you have to understand. Operations such as these have been going on all throughout the Cold War. Right? Russian spies, intelligence agencies had as one of their sole strategic objectives the degradation of Western society, degradation of Western culture, trying to popularize communism within Western society, and hoping for a political shift towards the latter, right? And if that wasn't feasible, then at the very least, what they wanted to achieve was to get a very clear picture towards how Western society functions, how it's what are the origins of its liberal ideals, what are the cornerstones of its liberal ideals, and how can we best utilize them in our own counter strategies pertaining to Western influence, and not just within the geopolitical sphere, within their own communities as well. So with that knowledge in mind, it is very plausible that the Kremlin, Putin, or any Russian affiliated agency or entity had at the very least a hand in the whole scheme surrounding Epstein, because they perceived it as a way in which they could manipulate the capitalist elite of America, and thereby further their own influence, spread their own roots throughout these sub-cultures, throughout these sub-societies, these sub-demographics, if you will, and influence US foreign as well as domestic policy. So that is not a far-fetched conspiracy theory, and I'm quite certain that if Putin knew about the extent of the Epstein scheme, he will most certainly have tried to increase his influence within that group, whether that be economically, whether that be through intelligence gathering, whether that be through blackmail, through sabotage, for espionage, who knows. But it is very likely that Putin will at the very least have a hand in it, or at the very least would have tried to utilize the Epstein scheme for Russia's political agendas, especially those pertaining to the degradation of Western culture and Western society, which, as I've said before, has been a very important cornerstone of Russia anti-Western policies for decades on end now. So that's just something that I want to mention here. Once again, it's not as black and white. It's oh, Putin was the mastermind of it all. It doesn't work like that. The reality is often far more complicated. It's far more complex than simply pointing out one scapegoat and saying he was responsible for the whole thing. Networks don't operate that way. Intelligence networks don't operate that way. Criminal networks don't operate that way, because obviously if all risk is attributed to one entity, it becomes very easy. And your entire network, your entire enterprise, your entire endeavor, whatever that may be, will obviously be very vulnerable and very prone to discovery, exposure, damage, and or capitalization in full. So that's just my 2 cents on this whole scheme. And here's also something that we must take into consideration, right? In the intelligence community, leverage is everything. And what is the best way to gain leverage is information. In particularly information that besmirches, information that discredited, information that's sensitive, information that can alter perceptions, right? That can shock a culture, shock a society to such a degree that the pillars of its moral perception begin to tremor and might even collapse and be susceptible to be exchanged for something more sinister, which in the case of the Russians will most certainly be ideal. And we already see a lot of this happening, right? Ever since Trump got elected into office, ever since Trump first became president in 2016, there has been a huge movement that seeks to be solely geared towards excusing Russia for its many blemishes, trying to increase Russia's popularity within Western culture and within Western societies. Very similar to the tactics of the Muslim Brotherhood and later of Al-Qaeda, who pretty much adhered to similar strategies pertaining to gaining knowledge and understanding of Western culture and society, and then utilizing that within their own policies and within their own tactics and strategies to undermine Western efforts and to gain a foothold within the Western zeitgeist, within the mindset of the Western people, whether that be through shock, whether that be through the manipulation and the sabotage of educational programs, the infiltration of campuses, you name it. But this has by no means, this is not a new strategy, this is not a new tactic. This has been around for decades and decades and decades. Just most people are still unaware of it. And that by itself is a great peril, I might add. So, obviously, if the Epstein scheme goes as far as many of these documents suggest, then yes, it will be very likely that many intelligence entities will at the very least have had individuals associated with them that may have had a hand with it, whether they would be participants or whether they would be infiltrators and trying to get as much discrediting information or intelligence or data on these very influential, important figures in order to influence policy, whether domestically, internationally, economically, you name it. So, yes, that's definitely not far-fetched, as Hollywood as it may sound, because these tactics and these strategies have been there, let's say, for like I said, for decades and decades and decades and that. Not just through Russia, not just through China or Israel, but the United States of America as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. But what I do want to add, though, is that obviously when we are seeing these huge data dumps, right, these huge dumps of intelligence, especially pertaining to a very high-profile case such as the Epstein case, it's very important to differentiate right from wrong. It's very important that we get our information from credible sources. Forget Instagram. Just forget TikTok. Most of what's circulating on those platforms, you can throw straight in the trash. It's either AI generated, or it is manipulated to such an extent to put a bad light on one individual, another individual. The documents speak for themselves. So what I want to advise my listeners and my subscribers is, and my viewers, is to, always double check, fact check, right? In my opinion, if the intelligence breaches pertaining to the Epstein case are as vast as the records claim, then this has been one of the most severe counterintelligence failures in US history, right? And like I said, it's one of the reasons why these schemes are so attractive for intelligence agencies, right? Because you see very influential, very powerful people at their most vulnerable, right? And especially people that have been at the top of their industry or have been influential or have enjoyed a high-profile status for, let's say, decades on end, they become careless. They feel like they're on top of the world and that nothing can ever kick them from that mountain. So they start making mistakes. And this is exactly what intelligence agencies and what proper intelligence operatives look for and then try to utilize and take advantage of. People, very similar to the Trump affair pertaining Russia, when people ask, is Trump a Russian asset? And let me get one thing clear. An asset is different than a spy, right? Intelligence agencies have thousands of assets around the globe who are not agents, who are not trained, sometimes who are not even on their specific payroll, or sometimes they don't necessarily have any allegiance to the intelligence agency in question. Just there's something about them, there's something about their business, something about their network that is utilizable, and thereby they can be defined as an asset. So, of course, based upon his demeanor, based upon his rhetoric, yes, Trump is most certainly a Russian asset, absolutely, because many of his maneuvers, politically, culturally, rhetorically, are highly advantageous for the Kremlin and its foreign policy and its standing within the geopolitical sphere in general. So yes, Trump could most certainly be considered a Russian asset, just as Epstein might have been at one point considered a Russian asset. Just we must keep in mind that there's a very clear distinction between a spy, an agent, and an asset, right? So once again, it comes down to moderation and relativity, right? We must be able to separate that fact from fiction, and be able to draw that line, that relative line, that line in relativity, let's say, that will help us not get swept away in this onslaught of data and information, and most of which is false or manipulated or sabotaged in some way, in order to besmirch and taint our objectivity. And that's pretty much the note on which I want to end this video. It's been a relatively short clip. Like I said, nothing has really changed within the geopolitical sphere as of this moment in time. These negotiations, in my opinion, are a huge waste of time. The Iranians are not going to budge, the Russians are not going to budge, the Ukrainians shouldn't budge, and the Americans are just wasting a lot of taxpayer money with all those flights going to Oman and Istanbul back and forth. Pertaining to the Epstein files, I have said my piece. If there's any more developments occurring within that case that has relevance for this channel, the geopolitical sphere in general, then I'll be sure to discuss them on this channel and with you all. If you have any comments for me, if you have any questions for me, leave them in the comment section down below, or reach out to me on one of my socials, and I aim to get back at you guys as swiftly as possible. This was all for this week. I thank you very much for taking the time to listening to this clip. Like I said before, I'm really aiming to make this channel grow this year, really develop it, professionalize it to the fullest extent possible. And I hope you all be there to see it. Once again, thank you and have a good day.